Alright, so today we'll be testing the Radeon RX 6600 XT in Elden Ring. Now, I did include Elden Ring in my previous 8 game benchmark video, but today we'll be testing at multiple resolutions and multiple settings. We'll be starting off at 1080p with the maximum quality preset. Alright, here we go. Right, so we'll be starting just outside of the Church of Ella. Again, I've got a preset run that I do here. I just follow this path here. I run this path here, and then we fight some enemies, and we go over a little bluff there, or a hill. I keep on forgetting what to call it, and that's pretty much it, right? We don't do too much in Elden Ring. I'm just playing in this specific area because it is actually quite demanding. But you can see here that our GPU is only sitting at about 84% GPU usage. And the reason for that is the game is locked at 60 frames per second. Now you can unlock it. I just don't mind playing at 60 frames per second. I play with the controller, and this game is definitely fine at this frame rate. That's the wrong button. Haven't been playing this game for quite a while, but it is actually a pretty good game. It's one of the easier Souls games, but that does not make it easy at all. It's just if you want to start playing Souls games and you are a little bit scared of the difficulty, then I would suggest starting with Elden Ring. Elden Ring also won Game of the Year 2022, and it's very easy to see why. Right, so even going over this hill here, when the world opens up, we are still having a locked 60 frames per second experience here. It's pretty good. Our 1% lows are sitting at 55, and our 0.1% lows are sitting at 44. The game looks amazing, even at 1080p, and you can see that there's definitely a lot of detail. The lighting is brilliant, even though there's no ray tracing. The reflections are pretty good, and so is the gameplay. Alright, that's it for our 1080p run. Now we'll be doing 1440p. Right, we're now at 1440p. We're back at the Church of Ella, and let's start our frame rate counter here. Now you can see that we are still getting a locked 60 frames per second gameplay here. It does dip every now and again in my previous tasting. This RX 6600 XT was not really meant for 1440p gaming, according to AMD anyway, but the reason for that is due to its limited 128-bit memory bus and only supporting 8 PCI Express lanes. Now if you play on a system that's got PCI Gen 4, it's not an issue, but you will see a little bit of a performance degradation when moving to PCI Gen 3 system, but it won't be more than 10% at most. The real limitation for this GPU at higher resolutions actually come in the form of the 128-bit memory bus, where in testing the 5700 XT actually outperforms the 6600 XT in more games than not when playing at 1440p, but the 6600 XT beats the 5700 XT in most games at 1080p. Alright, so that's our little benchmark at 1440p. We actually did not see any frame rate drops. We've got an average of 60 frames per second, no surprises there. Our 1% and 0.1% lows are also pretty similar to our previous run. Not sure what this guy wants to do, but let's just kill him before we go. Alright, so next up we'll be testing 4K. Alright, we're now at 4K. We're still on the maximum quality setting preset. Not sure how this will go, but let's see. Let's just start our frame rate counter there. And now we are getting about 40 frames per second. It's not terrible. This game is definitely playable still at 30 frames per second. I'd personally prefer it to play at 60 frames per second, like at 1440p or 1080p. This is pretty impressive for this GPU. It's only got 8 gigs of RAM, right? So, or 8 gigs of VRAM. So you wouldn't really target 4K gaming, especially if you're not using upscaling. This game does not support any upscaling, but it doesn't really need it, right? In its current form, it's a pretty optimized game. Back when it launched, it was a complete mess with a lot of stuttering going on. It was still a very good game, still a very enjoyable game, but when you moved from one zone to the next, the stuttering was just immense, right? So we got a little bit of a frame rate dip here. We're not getting our 40 frames per second anymore, but our GPU usage is stuck at 98-99%, so that means that we are now fully GPU bound. Once again, this is a pretty entry-level budget GPU, so your expectations need to be realistic. It's definitely not aimed at 4K gaming, especially in modern titles, modern AAA titles at least. There are definitely some games that you can play at 4K, and you probably use upscaling to do that, but as I said on my previous video, 4K with upscaling is not really 4K, but you can still utilize your 4K monitor and still get a pretty good experience. But let's see what we need to do to get a 60 frames per second experience at 4K with a 6600 XT. Right now we're at 4K, but we are on the medium quality preset, and already I can see a pretty big difference. Just look at the leaves there in the trees. It's there's a lot of shimmering going on there. That's even without any upscaling. So the game natively does not support any upscaling, but you can still use AMD's RSR, which is Radeon Super Resolution, or if you've got an Nvidia GPU, you can use Nvidia image scaling. I tested the game with Nvidia image scaling, and I found it to be a little bit lacking. The same with RSR. It's just a driver level upscaler, so it doesn't really work perfectly in all games, and unfortunately in my experience Elden Ring falls under the games that it does not work that well in. It does work, but the artifacting and shimmering is just a little bit more increased, and therefore I would suggest not to use it. Right, so we are still getting just about 45-50 frames per second here. I doubt that we'll get 60 frames per second at 4K, but let's try the low preset and maybe we get lucky. All right, and we got lucky, it seems. So when I turn around, it does dip below 60, but we are now on the 4K low preset. You can see 4K low, and let's just reset our numbers here. Just look at the trees there, the lighting, everything. It just looks broken. It's a little bit distracting. Not sure if you'll be able to see it in the YouTube recording. You should be. That's how distracting it actually is. But yeah, you can see we're not getting mid 50s, right? Which is pretty good, seeing that this once again, this card is targeted for 1080p gaming for a reason, and one of the better looking games out there today can still run at almost 60 frames per second at 4K, albeit you have to play on the low preset. So my advice would be that if you've got an RX 6600 XT, rather play at 1080p on the maximum preset, or even 1440p on the maximum preset. This is not even the most intensive area or demanding area in the game. You do get to some lake area, can't remember the name now, and it is a little bit more demanding there, so you might get below 50 frames per second if you play on these settings. The same goes for the 1440p maximum detail settings. You might not get a consistent 60 frames per second gameplay, but I think 1440p high would definitely get you there. Alright, I know this was a little bit of a shorter video. It was a while since I did an Elden Ring video, and I just wanted to revisit it with this card. So thank you guys for watching. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and as always, we hope to see you in the next one.